Okay, let's go. You ready, Mark?
Ready to go.
Let's go. Let's get the revolution started. So, what are we doing today? Today, we're going to be talking about Salesforce to HubSpot. As we see it, there's been a ramp up of interest. Uh, Historically, we've seen over the last 3-4 years Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Pardot to HubSpot. But today we're really talking about the whole shebang, companies that are taking their entire Salesforce instance, ripping it out for HubSpot. I'm going to talk about that and spend the next 30, maybe a few minutes more, but around the next 30 minutes to walk through some of those aspects. So what are we going to do today? We're going to try to answer a few more questions, these few questions that are over here. We're going to start by, we're not going to convince you to move from Salesforce to HubSpot. That's not this webinar. This is for the converted. It's for those that are already considering it and want to learn more about it. So first thing we're going to talk about is HubSpot a good fit for larger companies? And what do we mean by larger companies? We're talking about 200 to 2,000 employees, more than 50, let's say 50 users, sales users, up to hundreds of a few hundred users. Then we'll talk about some a migration process that some of the aspects of that based on some recent rips and replaces that we did recently. Mark will share some aspects about. We'll look at how long a project like this should take, not just like what are the different phases. We'll talk about some of the impacts on cost. And like we asked last time when we talked about Marketo, is like, what about historical activity? And then we'll finish by talking about show me the money. So ready to get started, Mark?
Looking forward to it.
Okay, so let's get rid of this presentation and stop sharing and talk to me.
So I think we want to start, as you said, with is a good fit for larger companies. So I think the first question is, what is your current CRM? I mean, your current CRM, it depends on what, first of all, if it's Salesforce. I mean, we're assuming it's Salesforce, but what do you have? Do I have Marketo connected to it? Do I have Pardot connected to it? Do I have HubSpot connected to it? Because I'm assuming at that size of a company, you have marketing automation, not just the CRM. So I think that's first of all one question, because then it makes it's important to ask that question before I even start with the migration, because if I do have already HubSpot as a marketing automation, then the migration is very different. Then I have to migrate over two systems. So I have to migrate over the marketing automation and I have to migrate over the CRM. If it's just migrating over the CRM and it's already connected HubSpot to Salesforce, then obviously that is a big difference, and we can go into detail on that
In the
type of
example that we're
migration.
going to talk about today, obviously we're not going to share the name of the company, but thinking toward to that implementation, that the answer to that when we use that as our case study, they came out of a 100% Salesforce environment, that they were using Salesforce and Pardot, and moving over to HubSpot across the board. There's also going to be the ROI calculation that we're going to show at the end of the webinar, as well as the process that we would walk them through. So considering that, and obviously there's a dependency, right? It's not true for every single company, but share with us why that company eventually, what are the main reasons why this is a mid-sized company that fits the profile that we talked about, that I said what a mid-sized or a larger company would be considered. What were the main drivers that that got them to move from Salesforce to HubSpot?
So I think one of the main drivers, as you said, is it could be price, in the sense that how many seats, how many people are using Salesforce at the moment. A lot of the time, companies start with a big, we have a whole bunch of users. We have 60, 70, 80 users, 150 users, whatever. Do I need all those people to actually have a full license and pay for them? What are they doing as sales users? Over time, you might find out that not everyone is actually using the system. You have lots of managers that only need to view. And the model with Salesforce is you pay for every single user. Obviously, the different types of users, but that one thing is affects price. The second is, again, if I already have HubSpot that's connected to it, then maybe I'll just have one database. So not only do I have price, but I also have
Wait a second, but they had Pardot and they had Salesforce CRM.
Yeah, but those are two systems anyway.
I love hearing you say that every time.
I had two systems, and I had a conversation yesterday with a customer that is we're actually migrating from Pardot and Salesforce to HubSpot. And I said to her, well, let's just export everything from Salesforce into HubSpot. And she said, well, I can't trust the connection 100% between Pardot and HubSpot. So it's not 100%. The database is not exactly the same on both sides.
Salesforce.
Sorry, I can't trust that the X amount of contacts and leads that I have in Pardot are the same contacts and leads that I have in Salesforce, because there are sync errors there as well between, even though it's the same company, it's still two databases and there's an actual connector between them. So I have to deal with that, and let's just export from the one, do a lookup between the two, and then make sure that we have the entire database. So that is, as you said, is still an issue. Doesn't matter what marketing automation, I have that sync error. I have not 100% reporting. I'm not looking at 100% the same database, spending a lot of time and energy on trying to sync between the two systems, whether it's HubSpot, Pardot, or Marketo to Salesforce, making sure that that's up to date, making sure that I manage that correctly. So that for me is probably, besides the costs, one of the better reasons to say, okay, you know what, I'm just going to have one database, whether I'm in marketing, sales, or customer success. I'm looking at the exact same contact. I might have a different view, might have different information, but that market penguin strategies are the same market penguin strategies. It's unique, and they're not 7 different versions of it. And for my reporting, for me looking at that, it's one database. That for me is a huge shift in the way you look at things and the way you can manage your data, for all the reasons that I said: enrichment, reporting, making sure that the different teams are looking at the same person, no delays, no sync errors. Another issue we have across the board, syncing any of these marketing automations to Salesforce, is that you might decide that not everything syncs over. So I'm only going to sync over MQLs or intent data. And then I have some of my data in the marketing automation and some of the data in the CRM. So in HubSpot, there's no such thing. It's all in one database. And I can just distinguish them based on lifecycle stages, where they're in the funnel, and so on and so forth. But the data is the data. It's there. I don't have to worry about exporting. And then the other thing that I get across the board with a lot of our customers that have that model, where they have Salesforce on the one side and marketing automation on the other, is conversations between marketing and sales and different teams of, I can't trust the data. I'm seeing different things. I'm seeing 10,000 on the one side. I'm seeing 8,000 on the other side. So it's all around the same issue, but that's the same problem that you need to manage.
There's a myth out there, which I think you busted, which is people move from Salesforce to HubSpot because of the user experience. And although there might be something to do with it, but it sounds like users just can get used to anything. That the big reasons that we're seeing, that you're seeing as well, is both cost and data, or simplicity of managing the data, which is really cool.
So if we just, yeah.
We got.
I mean,
I
if
just
we're
got a
just talking
question
about a
about.
CRM, then I agree with what you're saying. If I have the marketing automation inside HubSpot, then ease of use, obviously, HubSpot trumps the others, I think.
Yeah,
But if we're
I think
just
it's.
talking about the CRM, then for sure, it's
Yeah, no.
not.
After that, the users, say that there's the training and the adoption is easier because we have the same user interface across teams. Um, Going a little bit off topic because a question came in, and we mentioned the lead a few times, and maybe it's because they heard of the recent, it's not so recent, but it's fairly recent, the lead process change, or that HubSpot in it. And we were laughing about it earlier today with that funny LinkedIn video, which I'll post out, which basically, what about the lead object in Salesforce? Like, how does HubSpot handle it, and why? And is that an impact at all in this conversation? Without, we need a separate webinar to talk about the lead process. Definitely, I think that's a top worthy topic. But maybe just give it. Maybe if you want, you could even give a quick show, or just talk through it, whatever you think. This is a off the cuff webinar, so I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. But if you think if you think I think the lead process is something that's a game changer. How HubSpot has rethought it, so I think it's worth taking that question.
Great. So I'm actually going to show while I'm actually talking about this, but so Dynamics and Salesforce both historically have built this process, which is very linear, in the sense that a lead comes in for the first time, I meet with them, I try and get a meeting with them, I qualify them. Once I qualify them and I feel comfortable, I convert them to a contact, open an opportunity, open an account, and carry on the sales process. So in essence, that moves from marketing to inside sales, especially with bigger companies, to the sales team. Okay. And that's how Salesforce is built, and that's how Dynamics is built, and that's how a few other systems. Why is that broken today? Because we know that that is correct the first time. But what happens now that I've actually weren't successful in opening even an opportunity? I'm stuck with that lead. What happens if I've actually closed that opportunity or opened that opportunity? That person becomes a contact, and now it becomes closed lost, and that person a year later reaches out again, and I want to start a new opportunity with them. How do I manage that process again? So now I don't have the lead statuses that I have in the lead, because it's not a lead, it's a contact. So I need to make sure that whoever is dealing with those inquiries that are coming up again. So if it's a new lead or a lead that inquire in that process, I know how to manage it. How do I manage it, and how do I manage the re-engagement of someone who's already in the database as a lead, or especially as a contact, and who is supposed to manage it? So then we have the same issues of, well, my SDR team only looks at leads, that don't look at contacts. We haven't created a view for them. So when people re-engage as a contact, I don't even see that. It's not even on their radar. And then there are all kinds of workarounds, and we do that on a daily basis for our customers, is to try and find different ways to work around to build that. Where in HubSpot, they've actually said, hang on, let's get rid of it, because we only have one thing, which is called a contact, which is a person. And let me share my screen now. So hopefully I've been clear on what are we talking about. And that person goes through a process, and they might go through that process multiple times. So I'm just going to jump into our database. The goal of this process is to actually set up a meeting, if you think about it. So I have what's called in HubSpot a contact, a company, and a deal. And that contact can be all kinds of stuff. It can be someone at different stages. Okay. And if let me go into a test account for myself, So let's say a tester lead market penguin strategies. Let's find someone. Okay. So Mark comes in, fills out a form, and here for the HubSpot hacks, goes to a salesperson, goes to Perry in this case, and reaches out. Or Mark is even a custom, or Mark has a closed last deal. There can be a whole array of people. Mark came into the database 3 years ago. Okay. I want all the information. I want all the activities. I want to see everything. But now Mark reaches out again. And my goal when he reaches out, you can see I was disqualified on the 25th of March. Okay. I went through a process. I asked for something. I spoke to Perry. Perry says it's not a good idea. And I'm going to disqualify you, and I'm going to disqualify you with a reason, which the reason is bad timing. Let's reach out now in another 2 months. Okay, so 2 months have gone by. This is just a test, obviously. And I reached out again. How did I reach out? I could have filled out this form submission, or I could have gone out to our demo page or the contact page. But I go back to the inside sales team again. And then their job is to go through another pipeline. Okay. And the pipeline, again, is where the goal is to either schedule a meeting or to qualify and open an opportunity. If we try it for the second time, and again, this could be I'm reaching out, Mark, as I reached out because I was a hand raiser, or I've been very active on the website and the inside sales team decides to reach out again because I'm looking at the pricing page. Suddenly I can do all kinds of stuff. And they reach out, and then we have a conversation. I say, you know what? It's great, but it's not really to open opportunity. I didn't understand what you guys were offering. Let's reach out in 3 months' time, or this is not a good fit. So when you click on disqualified, I have a whole bunch of reasons that I can go in and say this is not a good fit, or bad timing, or budget constraints. If I put on budget constraints, then what I'll do is I'll say nurture, just get marketing to start nurturing. And then I can actually do, as a salesperson here, I'll say, you know what, I'm going to reach out in 3 months' time, and automatically creates a task for me. So we've gone into too much detail, but the bottom line, what is important,
I think this is like really important to show. I think this is like I said, we have this is like an additional reason we're seeing this being a better fit for larger companies who are getting lost under this lead object, which was invented who knows how many years ago, and hasn't been revisited. And I think that this is a big thing. So I obviously we don't want to jump too far into it because I want to have enough time to talk about the migration process. But this is the fourth reason. Just to remind us, we're going to talk ROI, data, lead process, and user experience. So jumping into the next thing.
I just want to add one thing before we move over.
Right.
One of the things that, and probably a year or 2 years ago, I would say a bigger company would say, hang on, this is not a good fit for me, is that you couldn't customize the different views. You can customize like much more. It's obviously in Salesforce, I can build whatever I want because it's code. But here, if I click on this now, I can already customize virtually any part of the view that I want. So I can customize, sorry, I'm going to the different object and the contacts. And now you can see here that I can actually create a team view for different teams, have a different team. You can see now I can customize virtually everything. So I can have the different cards, I can have the activities, and I can actually see that different teams can have a different view, number one. And number two, I can also customize based on the type of contacts or the type of company. So if a company is in a certain industry, I want to make sure I have different fields on the left-hand side that will pop up. So you can customize, probably virtually everything and build in what's called specific cards and pull in external information and have that on. So this is moved in, it's kind of completely in the last couple of months become very customizable, which will allow me kind of to have multiple teams.
Yep.
And
I think
that hump that existed before.
Many of this is like another example of many of the barriers that were holding them back. The customization, definitely user permissions and things like that, which all have been solved. I'm going to jump over to the process that we talked about. Let me just share my screen now. Going into the timeline and the process that we've kind of put out. This is an example timeline of the process that we've shared. And if you, high level, it's at the minimum, especially when you're doing the entire process, not just marketing, but sales, marketing, and others. We're talking about minimum 4 months, usually up to six, depending on. There's a lot of dependencies. We won't go into them all right now, but and we have like 5 main parts of it that we see. Right, is the first is migrating the systems, right, and getting making sure we have the requirements and building it out and whatnot. And then there's a part that is with the marketing team, part with the sales team, where we workshop, make sure we have all the processes, we build those out, do quality assurance and user acceptance testing, integrations with larger companies. This is a critical phase because HubSpot, as great as HubSpot is, and yes, now we don't have to do sales and marketing integration, but there's other systems. They're getting payments. They might be using they might be doing different reporting tools, or and on and on. And this is really critical that we get it right. There might be ERP involved, you name it. And then the very delicate part needs to happen kind of at the last second is this switch over. We need to make sure we have a lot of work to do with the data migration, making sure that it's clean and ready to go, but we can only kind of turn it over in the last minute so that when we go live, we don't lose anything and there's no downtime. Mark, you want to give us give us some of the things to look for, like where are the biggest hiccups that you've seen within this process? If we can just pick the top 2 or 3 things to be careful for, things to think about that you should make sure people should be thinking about ahead of time.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would do is focus on the actual business processes and designs. Okay, so one, are we keeping the same business processes that existed in the CRM in Salesforce? Is it an opportunity to build new business processes? Are we just copying over, doing a copy paste and recreating in HubSpot what existed in Salesforce, or is this an opportunity to rebuild everything? So that's one question you need to ask. Then we need to obviously map that out, design, and understand, so that before we actually go down to what custom fields we need to create for each object, we need to understand, do we need to create, or do we have any custom objects that we need to recreate in HubSpot? So for example, a lead and a contact in Salesforce matches a contact in HubSpot, that's taken care of. Second thing is obviously a company and account, and third is an opportunity in a deal. But if I have line items, campaigns, any custom objects, I need to, first of all, we'll go into detail how to create those, but I need to make sure that that's mapped out, what the association is, and think of how I'm actually going to migrate the data afterwards. So that's something that is very important. Make sure that I have all the fields. Again, the question is, do I need to recreate all the fields that exist in Salesforce, or do I have lots of legacy fields that were created over the years that it's an opportunity to clean up? Moving over a whole bunch of a mess from one system to the other is not going to help. So it's an opportunity to say, what do I really need? And then I go in and I can, okay, I'm not going to create over everything. I'll move over exactly what I need. I think that is a great opportunity to kind of
that's a great point. I think that and a really strong tip that I think is really important before we even get into week 1, before you make a decision to pull the trigger on buying a new system, in this case from Salesforce to HubSpot, is there's to make sure that you do the pre-work either internally or with a consultant that specs out all that business process that you talked about, and make sure it's laid out in front of the front of HubSpot, in front of the consultant that's going to walk you through, or whether it's us or another partner, with so that it can be clearly spec'd out ahead of time, and also allow you to get a demo or see another company that has similar processes, in order to make sure there's no surprises afterwards. There's as little as possible. There's always some level of risk, but that lowers the risk immensely. Whereas we've seen companies who rush into it and then realize afterwards that that it's more that it's not as easy as they thought it would be. So I think that's a really important tip that you inferred, and I think that's really important as part of this process. It also help lower risk, but also help with the costs as well.
The other thing that I would add, which is very important, is the stakeholders. So before you jump into it, is like, what are the expectations? So you might decide as the owner of the company, or there's some kind of decision that comes across that says, okay, we're migrating from one system to the next. You need to also double check with the actual users that their expectations are, one, things look different, things work different. Okay, the business process, can I rebuild, or I should be able to rebuild the business process so that in HubSpot I can do it in a certain way. It was not going to be exactly the same. So those expectations need to be rebuilt, and maybe have some kind of reverse demo to say, okay, this is what we're doing today. What is it going to look like in HubSpot, and how do we do that? And make sure that the stakeholders that are part of that decision already ahead of the time are aware of that, so that they don't suddenly put, spikes in the wheels and say, hang on a second, but we're doing it today in this way, and I don't want to do it, and it's too much work to click 3 times to do it a different way, for example. So between Salesforce and HubSpot, it's not that much different. But there might be things that you might have to give up on Salesforce, that you have some kind of, something that you don't want to rebuild, that was, a custom tool, something that was built in Salesforce, and you now need to use an external tool. And it's not inside Salesforce, it's external to HubSpot, but it's pulled in. And I'm going into too much detail, but is that a showstopper? Or is that something that, okay, when you look at the ROI, it makes sense to rebuild externally and pull that into HubSpot now, not built in Salesforce, and say, that's fine, just the team that uses that tool needs to know that they're going to be using a different type of tool that is syncing over to HubSpot now. And if that is okay, then that's good to go. So that's something else that I would look at.
Sorry about that. I meant to jump back to make sure we answered all our questions. Right.
You want to jump
just
on?
Remind us about historical activity. I can see from don't necessarily have the same participants from last time. You talked about it. I'm assuming that it's a very similar answer, but there's, just like you showed before, and there's a lot of historical activity stored in each contact record. How and what is the best practice around that to get that into
Yeah, that's very important. So the basic things that I wouldn't even think twice about, I would just create as a historical date stamp, or create a new field in HubSpot. So for example, original Salesforce create date. Okay, when you push everyone or migrate everyone over into HubSpot, the create date will be the date that they get migrated over. So obviously that create date is wrong. So there are different ways to fix it. One is you can actually push through the API and actually override that create date so they get the historical create date. If you don't have the ability to do that, or you don't want to do that, then you need to create a second field that says Salesforce create date, so you can actually do some reporting. And then any other events that is very important that you had, I don't know, last activity, but it depends on the type of business. Any other date stamp or event like MQL date stamp, or anything that you're mainly reporting on, which I think is the most important thing, and be able to go back and look at the data. Any analytics data that you have, then I would create that as it's a historical Salesforce MQL date, so that I have that. I don't really need to use that field going forward, because I might have the lifecycle stage became MQL in HubSpot. But I would think it that way. That's number one. Anything to do with the actual activities, again, if it's the marketing automation activities, then we talked about it last time. There's different ways of pushing that over. We can also create the tasks. The connector itself, and again, if you connect it to HubSpot and Salesforce, and then you switch off the connector, then you can actually push all that data anyway. You've got that in HubSpot, so that's really easy. If you're migrating from any other marketing automation, then we'll have to either create fields but I would map out what's important. What am I reporting on? I would start with that. What are the current reports that I usually create? And then how many MQLs were created last month? How am I going to get that data? Okay, so going forward, that's easy to set up. But if I want to now go and create a report going back, how do I get that information? So those are the questions that I would try and answer before decide or what data is important, because I don't need every single historical activity that happened.
Okay. And then let's before we get into the money, is there I think that's a real, we went through the important thing about it is planning ahead as always with regards to historical data, because it's not straightforward. You're not going to get everything the way you saw it in Salesforce. You want to make sure that the important data gets pushed over. Any best practices or gotchas, because going live is probably the most delicate part of the whole process. You got it all right, but the day that there's that period when you turn it on and you turn off. So when you turn off Salesforce, what are some of the things that people might not be thinking about when they get to that phase that you want to share?
So a few things. One is when I switch off Salesforce and move over to HubSpot, how do I do that? So the best practice is actually to have a core team already working inside HubSpot in parallel to Salesforce for a couple of weeks, just to say, okay, we feel comfortable, we've tried it out, nothing's missing, it's working great. I'm looking one system comparing to the other. Now we can roll it out to the rest of the company. Okay. So I would have this kind of pilot team where they go in and they already start working in HubSpot before they move over to Salesforce. The rest of the team is still in Salesforce. You keep the connector if you can keep it connected in, or you work in parallel on both teams and you get them to actually work on real data. So you move over a small team, get them after you've set everything up. Then once they feel comfortable, then you say, okay, now we can pull the switch and kind of move the entire team over. That's number one. Number two is, as we said, the historical data, make sure that the data migration happens also at the right time. So it depends how I'm migrating the data. If I'm just pulling it in through the connector because I already have HubSpot connected for the marketing automation, or do I have to import and export? So that import and export has to happen before. You need to make sure that everyone's trained and they feel comfortable and they're not going into HubSpot for the first time where you suddenly say, okay, we're switching off Salesforce and now moving over to HubSpot. The other thing that's very important is the ability to have a backup. Obviously, when you're moving over, make sure all the data is backed up. And if you're switching off Salesforce completely and you don't have access to it, then there's also things that maybe you didn't migrate, but you want to have the historical data or reports or anything. And you'll say, okay, great. I need that information. I don't have access to that anymore because I've switched off that system. So I would try and, it's something that's to do with the going live, but it's something that I would also think about. I created this list, I created this segmentation. So that needs to be also part of making sure that you have that all in place so that you have that information so that you can rebuild that in HubSpot going forward and go live. And as I said, having everything set up properly and enough people trying out the system before you actually move over. And you need to pick who the right stakeholders that are actually going to be in that pilot team so that they can actually go across and be champions for you as well across the company and say, great, guys, it's working fine. I'm feeling comfortable. you're going through the training. Let's go and let's move over.
Awesome. So I think I'm going to jump into what everybody's been waiting for, and let's talk about the money a little bit. And using data from, like I said, from a project that we're talking about, this will give you an idea of how it works. So let me just walk through it, because I'm sorry about that. We're back here. So what we're looking at here is a company that had I didn't write it in here. They had close to 100 users in Salesforce. Goes to what you talked about at the beginning. They didn't need all of them. We're able to bring it down to about 50 sales users, HubSpot sales users, and 10 core users. Because as you know, in the new in Marketing Hub, you require users to that. If you have marketers that are using it, you need to buy users for it. They also bought Ops Hub. Like I said, this is enterprise. The cost was about 12,500 monthly recurring from a monthly perspective. Meaning in year one, it was costing them about $150,000 year one and year two. Obviously, it goes on. Salesforce, on the other hand, they were paying just a bit more, almost $15,000, $15,000 a month. And because there's a migration period, there's an overlap of a few months, so we need to put that into our calculation in our year one calculation. The cost of the project, just as a rule of thumb, migration implementation projects usually cost anywhere from 0.6 to 1.2x your annual spend. It's just a rule of thumb. Some of the things that go into what's low, what makes it lower, what makes it higher is a lot of it's what's your internal resource capability. How much do you want to outsource versus do on your own? The more you want to outsource, the higher the price, obviously, and obviously the internal. You still have to take into account internal costs, because obviously during the migration implementation, there's some internal resources. In this case, it came out to about $25,000. So if we look at all of that, all of that in year one, the whole total cost of ownership was about $600,000. Basically, once you do all the calculations here, in year one, year one was break even, and then ROI obviously is going to happen in year two, where it was pretty significant, because you can see here part of that not having to deal with the data part, which was causing a lot of problems, a lot of friction in the systems, duplications and other things. Really, they were able to bring down the cost of their internal team versus they were paying about $23,000 a month internally, and externally about $13,000 to $14,000. That came down pretty dramatically. So that, together with the reduced license cost, wasn't dramatically less licensing cost, but total cost of ownership ended up saving them about almost $200,000 a year. Pretty significant, and that's just an example of that pricing and that cost, which is what's driving companies to make this change. And if there's no other questions, we'll wrap it up, unless, Mark, you have some famous last words. You're on mute, so.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can.
I think to summarize, as you said, is to make sure you plan this out, have a timeline for everything. Obviously, there are things that you took into account that once you deep dive and go into the systems, you suddenly. The other thing that we didn't talk about, which is important, is integrations. So you got the migrations, but what other integrations Emma actually has Salesforce connected to? So I need to double check that. I'm assuming most cases, most of them will be able to connect directly through the App Store, the HubSpot app marketplace to HubSpot. And if not, that there's the APIs. But if there's something that HubSpot or that company doesn't have an integration, native integration, and you need to either use webhooks and the operational hub. So those are things that have to come, as you said, before you even start this process, to make sure that you have that taken into account, so that you don't suddenly come up with, oh, hang on, I need the operational hub, I need Zapier, I need to go live, and I didn't plan that as a separate mini project. Didn't take it in the pricing. It's not in my ROI calculator, and so on and so forth.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. If there's any questions, you can send to us afterwards. If you have ideas or other areas you want us to go into in future HubSpot hacks, we'll be more than happy to. Till next time.
Thank you.